Cuba is right now a failed nation. They don't even have jet fuel to get for airplanes to take off. They're clogging up their runway. We're talking to Cuba right now. I have Marco Rubio talking to Cuba right now, and they should absolutely make a deal because it's really a humanitarian threat. And we have a lot of great Cuban Americans, and they're going to be very happy when they're going to be able to go back and say hello to their relatives and do things that they should have been allowed to do for a long time. I'm very interested in the people that are here that were treated so badly by Castro and the Cuban authorities. They have been treated horribly. So we'll see how it all turns out. But Cuba and us, we are talking. In the meantime, there's an embargo. There's no oil, there's no money, there's no anything.
Speaking aboard Air Force One, President Donald Trump declared that the United States is actively negotiating with Havana as the island struggles under a White House-imposed oil blockade. He added that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is leading direct discussions with Cuban officials and urged Havana to strike what he described as a necessary humanitarian deal. The administration has tightened trade restrictions, citing Cuba's ties with Iran, Russia, and China, and has warned it will punish any nation that sells or supplies oil to the island. The impact is already visible. Multiple airlines have suspended service as sanctions threaten aviation fuel supplies, disrupting international travel and compounding economic strain. For years, Cuba relied heavily on oil shipments from Venezuela under the leadership of Nicolás Maduro, but that lifeline has now been halted. The result is an energy squeeze with ripple effects across healthcare, tourism, and everyday life. Trump insisted that Cuban Americans would welcome a deal allowing freer movement and reconnection with relatives on the island. He also signaled strong opposition to what he described as decades of mistreatment under Castro-era governance, saying he is closely watching how the situation unfolds. Despite the mounting pressure, Trump stopped short of openly endorsing regime change, though he remarked that if such a move were considered, it would not be a difficult operation. In the meantime, he said plainly, there is an embargo. No oil, no money, no anything.
You're warning Cuba to make a deal. What does that deal look like? What do you want them to do?
Cuba is right now a failed nation. They don't even have jet fuel to get for airplanes to take off. They're clogging up their runway. We're talking to Cuba right now. I have Marco Rubio talking to Cuba right now, and they should absolutely make a deal because it's really a humanitarian threat. And we have a lot of great Cuban Americans, and they're going to be very happy when they're going to be able to go back and say hello to their relatives and do things that they should have been allowed to do for a long time. I'm very interested in the people that are here that were treated so badly by Castro and the Cuban authorities. They have been treated horribly. So we'll see how it all turns out. But Cuba and us, we are talking. In the meantime, there's an embargo. There's no oil, there's no money, there's no anything.
If a deal isn't made, would you consider an operation like the one in Venezuela?
I don't want to answer that. Why would I answer that? If I was, it wouldn't be a very tough operation, as you can figure. But I don't think that'll be necessary.
Mr. President.
International reaction has been swift. Last week, Mexico dispatched 2 ships carrying 800 tons of aid to Cuba, with further shipments planned to address urgent humanitarian needs.
We have stated that Mexico is doing everything on its part to be able to generate a dialogue that allows within the framework of the sovereignty of Cuba. Because this is extremely important, because it is furthermore our fundamental principle, the self-determination of all people, to generate the necessary conditions for a truly peaceful dialogue. And also that Cuba, without any other nation imposing sanctions, can receive oil and its essential derivatives for its daily functioning and its everyday operations.
We are sending different kinds of aid, different kinds of support. The ships are arriving today.
As soon as they return, we're going to send more support of various kinds, and we are insisting that Mexico can act as the state, the nation that opens its doors for this dialogue to unfold. Evidently, it depends on the parties reaching an agreement.
Meanwhile, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel sharply condemned Washington's actions, accusing the United States of attempting to strangle the Cuban economy through tariffs and coercive measures. In posts on X, Diaz-Canel described the blockade as unjustified and politically motivated, framing it as an attack on Cuban sovereignty.
She's a friend, Maria. One particular plan we saw in the Council of Ministers was the government directive to tackle a severe fuel shortage. That theory of economic strangulation is present, that complex economic strangulation objective.
We have always had to function amidst adversities, impositions, and pressures that are not imposed on anyone else in the world, and certainly not in such a very, very prolonged manner.
Cuba is willing to engage in a dialogue with the United States, a dialogue on any of the topics that one wishes to discuss or debate. Under what conditions? Without pressure. Under pressure, it is not possible to engage in dialogue without preconditions, in a position of equality, in a position of profound respect for our sovereignty, for our independence, and for our self-determination.
How are we going to keep the children's classes without fuel? How will our vital system function without fuel? How will we distribute our food? How will we plant? How will we till? How will we prepare the land? How we go about collecting all the products? How we go about transporting ourselves around? Consequently, we'll take measures that, although they won't be permanent, they will, however, have to do with, at each and every moment, the availability of fuel that we have. These will be measures that are going to demand effort. They are going to demand, I know that people are going to say, but sacrifice again? Well, if we don't sacrifice ourselves and if we don't resist, what are we going to do? Are we just going to surrender? And we have always shared that the option of surrender is not an option for Cuba.
As tensions escalate, the stakes are not only political, but economic and humanitarian. The question now is whether negotiations can produce relief, or whether the blockade will deepen, pushing Cuba further into crisis. For now, Washington says talks are happening, but on the island, the fuel tanks are running dry.